Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I am your host, Rob Port. Later in the program, Senator Kevin Cramer is going to be taking your questions, and just about all of his questions this week were on the same topic, and it's going to be the topic that I talked to you about here in the opening of the show, which are comments that he made recently in the context of President Donald Trump's war of words with Representative Elijah Cummings and I guess kind of the city of Baltimore. I'm not interested too much in that. I think Trump's feuds are boring and distracting and ultimately counterproductive from the perspective of advancing a conservative policy agenda. I don't know whether or not President Trump's actually a conservative and actually pushing for conservatism is probably a debate for another episode. What I wanted to talk about was the question of racist accusations and then also the question of Senator Cramer's comments about it. He said, Senator Cramer was asked about the situation with Elijah Cummings. And he said that in response to one of the questions, he said, quote, "I could be a victim of racism, but I don't offend easily. I just don't offend that easily." A reporter then asked him, how could you be a victim of racism? Obviously, he's a white male. And Senator Cramer said this, I quote, "Well, if somebody said something about being from North Dakota, every now and then I get a snicker about it. Somebody will say something about North Dakota in some snide way. I don't offend because I'm comfortable with where I come from. I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm comfortable with my own accomplishments and the accomplishments of our state." So obviously, in my headline on that was Senator Cramer, sometimes people are racist against North Dakotans. That was my headline over it. I thought it was a little bit weird that Senator Cramer diverged off into talking about people being snide about North Dakota in the context of racism. Obviously, people looking down their nose at you because you're from flyover country or from North Dakota or from a rural area is not racism. But I do think there's a point to be made about hate and whether or not hate has to fit in a particular category for it to be abhorrent. Now I look at it this way. I look at, and I had a big debate on social media about this. There was obviously a lot of people piling on Senator Cramer, and I even had some news media folks, sort of piling on me for my headline. And I am a firm believer that we carve people up into groups too often, and I talk about this a lot. But we all live our lives as individuals. Right? You don't live your life as a member of a group, right? I mean, there aren't like meetings of African Americans. There aren't meetings of white males. There aren't meetings of females. I mean, obviously there's sometimes groups that claim to represent those demographics to one degree or another. But for the most part, we live our lives as individuals. And as individuals, we're unique. We have a unique set of experiences. We have, a unique set of characteristics to our life that oftentimes diverge from what our groups may have experienced. And so I'm just, if we're going to talk about hating people because of the characteristics that are peculiar to them, then why is it okay to say, I hate people from flyover country, right? I'm thinking Saturday Night Live. Back when George W. Bush won re-election in 2004, did a skit and they called, basically the red states of America rural flyover country. They called it Dumbfuckistan. To me, that indicates a level of hatred for people from our part of the world, from the middle part of the country. That's not okay. And I wonder why, if you feel that way about people from the Midwest, or the West, if you feel that way, why do you think that you're operating on a higher moral plane than somebody who hates somebody else because of their skin color or their sexual orientation or their religious affiliation or their political affiliation? To me, hate is hate. And it's not okay. Now, the response to that is to resort to this sort of hierarchy of grievances, right? And I think the left does this a lot. I think there's even an academic term for it. It's called intersectionality, which is where we basically rank people's grievances. So if you're an African American, then you get to talk about, the history of slavery in this country and the history of Jim Crow laws and the civil rights fight. If you're a gay man, you also get to talk about the civil right, your own civil rights struggle, for legalized marriage, et cetera, the Stonewall riots and all that. But your struggle isn't as high as somebody who is African American. Unless you're an African American gay man, then I suppose maybe you rank higher than both because you have your foot in both camps. But that's intersectionality. That is, this sort of hierarchy of grievances. And to me, I don't see a lot of use in that. I'm not understanding what we're trying to accomplish when we engage in that sort of ranking. I say, because of your skin color, whatever, your grievances are more than mine. Because it's all about which groups that you're involved in. Like as though your skin color automatically means that you've had a disadvantaged life, or it automatically means that you've had a privileged life. I mean, let's talk about skin color for a minute. If you are the African-American son of an African-American federal judge, and you went to private school, and you lived a very affluent life in a wonderful community, and you went to college, and you went to a very, an Ivy League college maybe, and you got a good degree and a career, and you have a good career, and you yourself are very affluent, is it fair for somebody to look at you and look at your skin color and assume that you struggled in life? The truth is that person didn't struggle in life. Their success, their family's prosperity was able to grant them a lot of privilege. Now turn around and imagine you're a white man from Appalachia, and you were born to parents who were drug addicted, and you were raised in foster homes, and maybe you went to a public school that wasn't all that good, and you come up and you want to get admitted to college, and you're told that you rank behind somebody else of a different skin color because you have privilege, or maybe you even get into college, and then the activists on college talk about your white male privilege. And I think somebody with that sort of background, probably from an economically depressed area with an awful family background, probably doesn't feel that privileged. And I don't think that they might rightly be angry at people for suggesting that they have privilege because they don't feel very privileged. Now, we could talk about the larger question of systemic racism, where society makes assumptions of people based on their skin color. If even a black man from an affluent background who's been very successful in life may still face suspicion because of his skin color. Suspicion that maybe a white man doesn't have to face. Now, those things are real. I'm not going to discount them. But that's not the only lens through which we should see these things. Again, that's treating people by groups, right? If you look at a black man and you are intimidated by that person because of their skin color, if you make assumptions about whether or not they're prone to committing crimes based on their skin color, why is that any worse than assuming that black person has also been disadvantaged in life, assuming that maybe they came from an inner city to a single mother or whatever? Like, if you made those sorts of assumptions about them because of their skin color, how is it any better than making some negative assumptions about them? Why should we judge anybody based on the groups that they belong to? That's what the left does. That's what intersectionality is all about. Judging people based on the groups that they belong to and not who they are as individuals. And we need to get away from that as a society, which brings me back to Senator Cramer's comments. Now, I have no idea. You can hear him address it at length during our interview later in the show, and I don't want to speak for him. It's not up to me to tell you, the rest of you, what he meant. He can do that. But I can tell you that these are the things I thought of when he talked about it. if you are disrespectful towards people from North Dakota, if you look down your nose at North Dakotans, if you assume that North Dakotans are stupid or maybe unsophisticated, if you look down your nose and you say that they're, rubes, how are you doing any better than making assumptions about people because of their skin color? I mean, do you really think that, you're operating on a higher moral plane by judging people that way than judging people by their skin color? Maybe we should just not hate people based on their skin color or where they're from or any of these other characteristics. Maybe we should judge people as individuals. That individual is a good person. That individual is a criminal and a bad person. And it doesn't really matter what demographic groups or anything else that they belong to. That's the world that I would like to live in. That's how I would like to go about, I guess sorting. I don't even know that sorting is the right word. I mean, that kind of sends a shiver down my spine too. But I mean, if we're going to go about cataloging our fellow man, our fellow human beings, I feel like skin color and sexual orientation, some of these other things, as important as they are in the makeup of an individual, are not the basis for assumptions that we should make about other people. By the way, there's been a lot of talk lately about whether or not Donald Trump is racist, and I think I've addressed this in previous episodes, but I want to address it again since we're kind of sort of talking about it here. I will say that I don't believe that Donald Trump is racist, but I think that he is a ruthless politician who is not above inflaming racial divides to get his political ends. Now, does that mean he's a racist anyway? I don't know. On a personal level, I don't think he's racist. I don't think he bears any personal animus towards African Americans or anybody else for that matter. I just think that he knows that those sorts of divides exist in our country, and he's not above exploiting them to get what he wants. Which is, well, I'm not sure that's much better. Senator Kevin Cramer, up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Senator Kevin Cramer joins me now, as he does every week, to take your questions. Kevin, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Rob.
We are squeezing this question and answer session into a vote, and we don't have as much time as we usually do. So we're going to get right to the questions. And as you might imagine, a lot of questions about some comments you made in regard to the feud between President Donald Trump and Representative Elijah Cummings.
Sure.
Lots of people asking about that, so I'm just going to get right to them. First of all, via Twitter, TK asks for you to define racism.
Sure. So racism to me is whenever you if you have a statement or a position or treatment or, say you're calling somebody something or giving either preferential treatment to one group or maybe negative treatment to another based on their race. And this is where I find it very interesting that every time Donald Trump, attacks somebody or fights back or punches back, whether I think he should or he shouldn't, if that person happens to be something other than whatever Donald Trump is, that it's deemed to be racist. Or, which of course in my mind completely ignores the fact that he also punches at people who are a lot like Donald Trump. In other words, I don't think race is ever the determining factor in Donald Trump's positions or bias. It's more maybe philosophy. It might even be a particular attack on him. But Donald Trump, I often like to use the word, is an equal opportunity offender. I really don't see where race is the issue. And with Elijah Cummings, and to be fair, I've never heard Elijah Cummings attack Donald Trump for being racist. I don't think he claimed racism. I don't think Elijah Cummings, he punched back because Donald Trump was saying negative things about his community, but it's more the media, and that's who I really kind of had quite a conversation with a cluster of reporters, and I said, you guys all claim this racism on behalf of races that aren't even claiming it themselves necessarily. And so to me, I think the best thing, if you can be it, is to be a victor. And I think Elijah Cummings, frankly, is a victor. He's an accomplished politician and leader. He's much more liberal than I am, but I think he's quite effective at his job, both as a chairman and when he was a ranking Democrat on the oversight committee. I don't think he doesn't need anybody defending him because somehow he's getting attacked by the president because of his race. So it's interesting. I was one cluster of reporters was asking me, when have people in North Dakota ever been, or they said, what if Barack Obama would have said something derogatory about people of North Dakota? And I said, you mean things like, gee, they cling to their guns and their Bible and their religion, something like that? And one of the reporters said, touche, good point. In other words, I don't find that sort of rhetoric helpful personally, but I also don't think it's race oriented. And I just think playing the race card when it's not race, actually diminishes real race tension, real race activity.
Well, because we got a lot of questions on this front, and obviously what we're talking about is the comments that you made that people have made, disparaging comments about North Dakota. Those are out in the media. If you haven't seen those comments, you can read up on them wherever. They're all over the internet. Yeah. Another Twitter, though, he asks if you think North Dakota is a race, like being North Dakota, is that a race?
No, I don't think North Dakota, quote, as a state is a race. It's a state. But you can have a derogatory statement made about the state, as sometimes happens, and maybe even oftentimes happens. Maybe it's more in good nature, but as I pointed out just a little bit ago, when you describe, well, let's put it this way: just last night in the Democratic debate, Mayor Buttigieg made derogatory comments about Christianity. In fact, he made great presumptions about Christianity that are not true in how he characterized it. Now, Christianity is not a race. But it is a faith. It is a religious belief. It describes a lot of what North Dakota's culture is all about. And I could take great offense to that. I don't. I just kind of feel sorry for his ignorance about it. Now, I think maybe you and I haven't, but I have on other interviews talked a lot about my bill, for example, to rename Sully's Hill. Up at near Devil's Lake on the Spirit Lake Indian Reservation, rename it at the request of the tribe back to Whitehorse Hill, which was its traditional name. Sully, of course, was a general who was famous for fighting and killing Indians, including several hundred who would be ancestors to the people who live at Spirit Lake. To me, correcting that wrong makes all the sense in the world, and it's the least we could do, and it's not even really a correction when it's been allowed to stand for nearly 100 years, but at least we're making up to the best we can now. That makes sense to me, but I think when you can actually dilute it when you sort of play these political games with the word racist.
Yeah, well, let me add, because to me I read your comments, and the way they were reported was kind of clumsy. To me, hate is hate. Right, and there's lots of superficial reasons why that may motivate hate. Sometimes people hate people because of their race. Sometimes they hate them because of their religion. Sometimes they may hate them because of what part of the world. Like if I hated Canadians, if I just hated everybody from Canada, and I can't imagine why anybody would hate Canadians because they're lovely people, but let's just suppose I would be an anti-Canadian bigot. But I don't know, like if you're, I mean, some of the things that I've heard, I'm thinking back like Saturday Night Live when George W. Bush was reelected, and they had a term where they called us dumb bleepistan. I'm not going to say the word, but it was the F word. Sure. That's what they called the middle part. Now, to me, that's hate. You hate a group of people that are from a part of the world, and I don't know why you would think you're operating on a higher moral plane having that feeling than if you hate somebody because of their skin color or because of their religion, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. No, I think that's exactly right. And I personally don't. I really don't. I don't think most North Dakotans, by the way, do, although I think we have plenty of anti-Native American racism. But I think it's also a form of racism when you expect, when you treat somebody differently in the sense that you diminish their value by coddling. In other words, it's like I say about Maxine Waters or Elijah Cummings. These are really accomplished leaders. Yes, they're liberal. Yes, I disagree with them on lots of things. I actually like them both personally. I don't know either one super well, but I know them a little bit, served with them. I like them a lot personally, and I just don't think it helps to elevate people when you have claims of racism and you try to sort of create victimhood where there's not really a victim. Now, having said all of that, I found, frankly, one of the things I found sort of interesting during the Fighting Sioux debate, the name of the University of North Dakota, mascot. Well, I had an opinion and have an opinion that, I don't find it offensive or abusive, but I'm also not Native American. I'm also not a Sioux. So it's a little hard for me to claim that there's no offense when the offense isn't aimed at me. So I've always found it sort of difficult to defend that, and felt like the Sioux people themselves can make that determination, and I think that's ultimately what ended up happening. And I can disagree with it, but I don't proclaim to be an expert on it because I'm not one of them. On the other hand, there are lots of categories of people that are discriminated against, whether it's race or religion or geography or whatever the case might be.
Another question from Twitter. Ask him if he regrets equivocating centuries of family-destroying institutional racism to his being momentarily peeved at the perception of provincialism.
See, again, we're going to spend the entire future of the world relitigating the past. How about we change the future and speak more positively about the future? And what's going to happen is if we always go to this question, to this route, and the implications, ramifications of that statement / question, is we're never going to get to what we really want, and that's equality. And equality is not just in law, by the way. Equality in how we look at people, how we value people, again, lifting people up, making people victors, not victims. But if we are always, if it's always the other person that's the racist, then you really never move forward or move on.
Another question from the same. He had a follow-up on his patronizing non-answer. I guess they assumed ahead of time that you were going to have a patronizing non-answer.
Sure.
Following up on his patronizing non-answer, ask him if he could understand why many feel his exceedingly tone-deaf response only exacerbates the various stereotypes of North Dakotans that he ostensibly takes issue with.
See, this is somebody who wants to be offended, and I don't get that. I've never taken that position. Look, I grew up, in a different than most United States senators grew up. We all had something probably, and some people have more privilege than other people. I never want to be protected. I don't believe I'm entitled to anything. I don't even believe that I'm entitled to this job except for an election. And then if I want it again, I have to do that again. I've never been a person of entitlement, ever. I think a level playing field is exactly that. It's level. And then to the degree that there are appropriate ways to repair relationships and like changing the name or John Hoven and I have a bill to codify the Spirit Lake tribe's sovereignty over its law enforcement. I support that. That's self-governance, that's self-reliance, that's lifting people up, giving them responsibility. But if while you're doing that, at the same time you always reserve this other thing to be offended by, then you're always going to be offended, and you probably never really achieve equality or equal status. I don't view the world that way. I don't view it that way as a North Dakotan. I don't view it that way as, in any way. To me, we're all equal. We're created that way. Our founders said it, and as flawed as we were for a while with regard to that, we've made progress. We've still got a ways to go. But no, if you want to be offended, you can always be offended. And I always preferred have chosen to not be offended.
Via Facebook, David asks, since he believes people are racist against North Dakotans, will he fight to make North Dakota a protected class at the federal level, as it would be discrimination based on birthplace, and as such could technically be eligible with the right legislation? If the answer is no, does he not believe North Dakotans are in fact discriminated against, or does he seek to abolish protected class status?
Well, let me. I missed a little bit of that, but I think if I understand right, let me try to answer by answering that last question. Eliminating protected class status. I believe that there are some statuses that deserve to be protected because of history. But I also think that the sooner you can the sooner you can build people up to where they don't have to be protected, the better. Now, I can't affect every single person. I can't. I can only affect laws. I can try to pass laws that codify the equality of opportunity. Protected class is a funny thing. I've always found it ironic when people seek to be a protected class, because the first thing that they do is they presume that whatever it is they want to, whatever characteristic is they have, that I'm super interested in it. To me, equality means you shouldn't have to have a protected class. But again, even in the excellence of the American system, there have been things committed in our history that naturally we want to correct, and we ought to look for opportunities to do that. But if we always create protected classes, we never elevate people to equality. And to me, that's really an injustice. And by the way, the vast majority of people that I know don't want to be victims. They really don't. They want to be victors. And so that's why I find this. I mean, actually, I'm kind of surprised by this. I think this whole thing started with a press gaggle outside the Capitol, and it wasn't that big a deal to any of them. And I'm surprised that there are people that are that interested in it back home. But maybe there aren't that many. Maybe they just all happen to listen to this.
I attract podcast. The politically interested. I guess my audience. I
like that. Yeah,
I have always allowed left and right to have at it. Believe me, I have Absolutely. Lots of people on the left that follow me, I'm happy to, because I'm always happy to talk with them. Even though I rarely agree. I agree. That's all the listener questions. I want to ask you real quick. Some polling came out, DFM research. I know it's really, really early, but polling showed it polled Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. They only polled the DFM research. I know he's polled from both sides. I've commissioned polling from him. I respect him as a pollster. This is from May. But he is saying Donald Trump 54%, Joe Biden 39%. That seem right to you?
Yeah, I mean, it seems very optimistic for Donald Trump, but I'm not super shocked either. But yeah, that's every politician I know would take those numbers.
Trump's at 56% favorable rating among North Dakotans. That's about 93% Republicans saying somewhat or very favorable. Independents are split, actually, 47-47 favorable, unfavorable, and Democrats 9% favorable, 86% unfavorable. That all sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right, but it also, when you look at all the numbers in the full context, it demonstrates just how very Republican North Dakota has become too.
As we look, we just saw the 2020 debates last night, and it was interesting because there were some moderate, I guess that's what everybody's saying, the moderate Democrats on the stage, people that have not really polled. They don't seem to have a lot of support, haven't raised a lot of money. They aren't polling that strong, but they sure made a lot of attention last night, pushing back against some of the front runners. Notably Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. A little bit of a food fight among Democrats. As somebody from a state, and the person you replaced in the Senate, Heidi Heitkamp's out on the campaign trail telling Democrats that they have to listen to rural voters and they have to moderate. As you hear some of that stuff, what did you think of that debate? I mean, are Democrats going to embrace this?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Rob. I think it's very healthy, first of all. And I'm always quick to remind people. In fact, a number of reporters today out here that were asking me about, I said, yeah, you have to remember, I don't pretend that these Democratic candidates are talking to me, or even really to North Dakotans. They're talking to their base. They're trying to win Democratic primaries in key states and things like that. So you always have to remember the context. And I'm not the expert because again, they're not talking to me. They're talking to their base. That said, I found it interesting. Reporters here found it boring. The reporters I talked to today, I talked to a lot of them. They really found it to be kind of boring. And I thought, good for some of these, particularly the governors that I think take a more pragmatic approach to all of this. And they also see what big federal government can do when it imposes itself on whether it's Montana or, Colorado. I think it's healthy because I think people are genuinely scared of the very extreme rhetoric that's coming from the front runners on the left in the Democratic Party. Markets are scared by it. People are scared by it. I think Democratic voters are. And I think you and I first made the news when I said that I think the reason Joe Biden is the front runner and continues to be, even though there's been some slippage, is because there's a whole bunch of Democrats in Normalville, USA out there that are primary voters or registered Democrats who, maybe don't have a place at the district conventions anymore, but in their polls they're saying, we like this guy because he's safe. He's what we remember as mainstream Democrat. Because when you start looking at other data pertaining to their messaging, things like socialism, for example, is just very, very scary to the vast majority of Americans, and Republicans and independents as well as many Democrats. Government-run healthcare, very, very unpopular. And these are like their main thing. How about immigration? The issues are very favorable to Republicans, assuming that we can articulate a vision for some.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because even here in North Dakota, we just had the 100-year anniversary of the Bank of North Dakota, right? Now, I think
right.
over the years, a lot of us have sort of very glibly referred to it, that's socialism and everything else. It's not really.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't meet the textbook definition. I think we've sort of been very glib about it, and maybe shame on us for that. But it's amazed me as I've written about it in my columns. There's a letter to the editor of the Fargo Forum today saying, Port's twisting things around, trying to say that the Bank of North Dakota isn't socialism. Don't they know we're all socialists now, and the public schools are socialist, and the highway department is socialist, and everything's social. I mean, they want to be. There's a faction in the Democratic Party that wants to be socialist. Like, they want us to believe that this is all socialism.
Yeah, no, I know. It is amazing what they'll try to do to create the momentum that really doesn't exist. And I'm actually quite encouraged by a lot of the things we're seeing right now coming, that the pushback that the mainstream is pushing back on with regard to socialism. And it's manifesting itself in the discussion on Medicare for all, for example. Now, when you say for all, that means the government's do it for everybody. All means something, or literally championing socialism. It's rightfully been rejected by the vast majority. Other than some younger people, we know that 18 to 34-year-old voters are a little more favorable to it, but they also don't have a historical context for it. And it's important that we bring that historical context in our school systems and our universities, which is why, by the way, I have that bill on Holocaust education, because of, again, bigotry and racism that is real in the form of anti-Semitism. And it's real right inside the Democratic Party among some of its elected leaders, as we know. And I think some of the reason for that is because some of these young leaders don't know what the Holocaust was.
Yeah.
So why else can AOC compare, a detention center for families that have walked 1,000 miles to get to the United States and need a place to sleep?
Well,
why can she?
Our culture has turned Nazis into video game characters. I mean, that's
right.
They've become cartoonic caricatures of what they were, and I think it's hard. I think it's hard for modern Americans to believe that sort of that was a real thing. I mean, that was an actual threat. There was a very large political movement in Europe that believed those things. You said we had about 20 minutes today, and we just passed the 20-minute mark. I wanted to get in one more question. Going back to the Democratic debate last night, I thought it was very interesting that the moderate, I think one of the comments was that candidates make fairy tale promises. They campaign on things that they cannot possibly pay for. I heard that, and I thought that was spot on the mark. I think politicians sell voters. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to Medicare for all. We're going to repeal Obamacare. Remember that?
Right.
And sometimes it just doesn't happen.
No, although I'd say, at least on that last one, the attempt was noble, and came one vote short. But yes.
Well, and some of the promises, too, were made at a time where we still had President Obama in the White House. I think telling people we were going to repeal Obamacare when Democrats was a divided Congress and we had President Obama in the White House, that just wasn't going to happen. But do you think, I mean, do politicians need to do a better job of being more reasonable when they talk to voters?
Well, perhaps, but we'll see how that bears itself out, because when you have 20 candidates, you do have just a built-in accountability. And again, I think, there was some pretty blunt talk about, let's get back to reality. In fact, I thought Senator Klobuchar did a nice job of that, and as well as a couple of these governors that challenges these, outlandish statements. And at the end of the day, the great thing about being an American is it's the voter themselves that gets to discern.
Kevin, thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rob. Bye-bye.
That's it for today's Plain Talk podcast. New episodes can be delivered directly to your devices if you subscribe to Plain Talk on one of the many, many podcasting platforms out there. I use Pocket Cast, but Spotify is a good one. There's lots of them out there. If you're having trouble, if you choose one of those platforms and for whatever reason you can't find Plain Talk on it, email me and let me know. I've helped a few of you find the show. I've even found a few platforms where Plain Talk wasn't available yet and was able to add the podcast to their library. If you want to follow all of my work, you can follow SayAnythingBlog.com. You could follow me on social media, Rob Porter, Say Anything Blog. Just search for them. If you follow search for them on Facebook or Twitter. If you follow my personal feeds, you're going to get, sometimes pictures of my kids or maybe some baseball commentary. The Say Anything Blog channels are more just straight work, just the blog posts, the columns, the podcast. So choose accordingly. If you ever have any feedback on the show, email Rob at sayanythingblog.com. If you want to send in questions for my weekly guests, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, use that email as well. Or watch my social media. You can submit questions that way as well. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.